A blow to Obamacare. A Texas judge strikes down the Affordable Care Act. Why the law is staying in effect for now. Border battle. The government could shut down over funding for President Trump's security wall. We're at the White House. The Vatican and China. Changes in leadership as a return of a historic agreement. And a big day for Pope Francis. How the Holy Father is celebrating his 82nd birthday. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, December 17th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle react after a federal court strikes down Obamacare. The federal judge says the law is unconstitutional. The Trump administration says it will stay in place for now, but legal challenges are expected. Correspondent Jason Calvi reports on the reactions from Capitol Hill. Jason?
Wyatt, Obamacare used to fine Americans who choose not to buy health insurance. Republicans eliminated that penalty in their 2017 tax reform. But the judge here says the rest of the law can't be separated from that penalty. The ruling is pulling lawmakers back into the Obamacare debate.
Representative Hank Johnson is a Democrat from Georgia who voted for Obamacare in 2010.
The people have shifted their opinions about Obamacare, and they now understand that it's good for them. They are benefiting from it, and they don't want their health care taken away from them.
But President Trump is once again calling on Congress to replace the health care overhaul.
It was a big ruling. It's a great ruling for our country. We'll be able to get great health care. We'll sit down with the Democrats if the Supreme Court upholds.
Democrats taking control of the House on January 3rd promised to appeal the ruling. And they say they'll fix problems as the case makes its way through the courts.
We will also be taking legislative action to shore up the Affordable Care Act. By all accounts, it's something that has needed improvement throughout the years, but Republicans have done nothing other than to try to repeal it, and they had no replacement.
Congress, controlled by the GOP for the last 2 years, failed to pass a replacement. Conservative Republican Mark Meadows tells me he's hopeful lawmakers can still act.
We've got to find some solution to lower health care costs and make sure that all Americans have affordable health care that cover pre-existing conditions. Hopefully we'll be able to do that.
For the moment, the ruling will not affect the 10 million people covered by Obamacare and the estimated 12 million low-income Americans still covered through the expansion of Medicaid.
Democrats are also talking about passing a bill to protect people with pre-existing conditions, but it's unclear if that version will pass the Senate and the president's desk. Wyatt?
So Jason, take us through what happens next?
Well, an appeal is very likely, it's expected, and that would go right to the appeals court in Texas. If it comes here to Washington, to the Supreme Court, it would be the third time that the High Court has heard an appeal about the fundamentals of Obamacare, the fundamentals of that law. The Obamacare has survived 2 of those past challenges.
We'll continue to follow this and see how it all develops in the next couple of months. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Pennsylvania's Attorney General has filed a legal challenge to new federal religious freedom rules. They allow employers to be exempt from providing birth control in their health care plans. The AG, Josh Shapiro, says the provision violates the separation of church and state and discriminates on the basis of sex. The Senate is expected to release a report saying Russian interference operations on social media are ongoing. The report indicates that during the 2016 election, the interference was more widespread than once thought. The findings were compiled by private researchers. Republican Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee says he will not seek re-election in 2020. The state's former governor served 3 terms on Capitol Hill. The National Right to Life Committee gave his voting record a 100% rating. More changes are coming to the Trump administration. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is leaving at the end of the year. He was facing federal investigations into his travel, political activity, and potential conflicts of interest. President Trump also named Budget Director Mick Mulvaney, who's Catholic, as his new acting chief of staff. General John Kelly is leaving the job in January. President Trump stands firm in a debate over border wall funding. He's threatening to shut down the government unless Congress approves the money he needs to fulfill a campaign promise. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. If the president and lawmakers can't compromise by Friday, then parts of the government will close. On President Trump's Christmas wish list, billions of dollars for a border wall. Today, a top White House official tells me they're still confident they'll get it.
You know, he's very focused on getting to that $5 billion number. We'll find ways to get there.
The president's senior advisor, Mercedes Schlapp, making it sound like the president isn't budging. He wants Congress to approve $5 billion for a border wall. Democrats are offering the president no more than $1.6 billion, limited to border fencing and other security measures. The president writes, anytime you hear a Democrat saying that you can have good border security without a wall, write them off as just another politician following the party line. Time for us to save billions of dollars a year and have, at the same time, far greater safety and control. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is telling the president to dig in and stand by his demand. But standing in the way, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who says the president is not going to get the wall in any form. That debate played out for the country to see last week in the Oval Office. The president saying he's willing to take the blame for a shutdown.
I'll take it.
Okay, good.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
A shutdown would send thousands of federal employees home without pay before Christmas, with about 1/4 of government affected. And if you have holiday plans at a national park, you may want to reconsider. Over the weekend, one of the president's top advisors said a government shutdown will absolutely happen if it comes to it. During an interview with CBS, Stephen Miller said the White House will do, quote, whatever is necessary to build the border wall to stop this ongoing crisis of illegal immigration. Wyatt, for people wondering about the delivery of holiday packages, a shutdown would not affect the U.S. Postal Service because it's an independent agency. What?
Mark, what other border wall funding proposals are there at this point?
Well, Republican Senator Susan Collins is urging lawmakers to revisit a bill she helped push earlier this year. It would provide $2.5 billion for border security. There is no indication at this point that it will gain traction, though. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. The Jesuit province serving much of the eastern U.S. have released the names of priests who face credible or established accusations of abuse. The cases date back to 1950. The list includes 5 current Jesuits and another 8 who are dead. The most recent incident occurred in 2002. The United States military kills more than 60 extremists in airstrikes in Somalia. The strikes took place south of the capital, Mogadishu. A Somalian intelligence officer says the raid was to prevent a major extremist attack. No civilians were injured or killed. The leader of the new Ukrainian Orthodox Church celebrates his first liturgy. Metropolitan Athanasius calls for Ukrainians to unite and to pray for peace. On Saturday, the country's bishops approved the plan for independence from the Russian Orthodox Church. They had been under the spiritual guidance of Moscow's Orthodox Church for more than 300 years. Iraqis began rebuilding an iconic mosque blown up in 2017 in a battle with Islamic State militants. The Al-Nuri Mosque was built in the 12th century. Security forces defeated the extremist group last year. Pope Francis says the third Sunday of Advent, known as Gaudete Sunday, invites us to be joyful.
Io benedico tutti i bambinelli.
During the Angelus on Sunday, Pope Francis blessed all the figurines of baby Jesus from nativities brought to St. Peter's Square. The Holy Father stressed this season of Advent is one of conversion. Thousands of people in Cuba are making a pilgrimage to the shrine of St. Lazarus. Many are seeking relief from health problems and hoping for economic prosperity and general well-being. St. Lazarus is the patron saint of lepers. Every year, pilgrims make their way to his statue near Havana. Coming up, analysis on the state of the Catholic Church in China. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. 2 underground bishops in China who are loyal to Rome have agreed to step aside. Last week in Beijing, Archbishop Claudio Celli, a representative of the Vatican, in the center of this picture, asked one of the bishops, Vincent Gao Shijin, pictured on the left, to cede his role to Vincent Zha Si Lu on the right. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, why is the Vatican asking these bishops who are loyal to the Vatican to step down?
Wyatt, the Vatican says that its main concern is unity. Asia News, a Vatican news agency, says the Pope is afraid that if the Vatican doesn't cooperate as part of its deal with the Chinese government on the appointment of bishops, that the deal will fall through. But this step has saddened many priests and lay faithful in China, according to Asia News. They see this as a betrayal on the part of the Vatican of millions of Chinese Catholics who have endured discrimination and suffering over decades.
So remind us, Juliet, what was the original deal the Vatican made with China?
Wyatt, that historic deal was struck in September, and the Vatican didn't release any details, however. So it did say that it was the beginning, not the end, of a process of dialogue, and the Vatican said the accord will allow the faithful to have bishops who are in communion with Rome, but at the same time recognized by the Chinese authorities.
What has been the reaction of Catholics in China to the news of the bishop stepping down?
Wyatt, we reached out to Father Bernardo Cervellera, who runs the online news agency Asia News, and he tells us Catholics in China are split. He says some denounce this move as a betrayal by the Vatican, but there are other Catholics in China who are happy because they say that now there is finally one official church in the country, and they see the unity as strength going forward. The Vatican says the bishop stepping aside is a gesture of obedience and, quote, a sacrifice for the general situation of the Chinese church. And according to Asia News, the Holy Father expressed his great appreciation for Bishop Guo and asked him to personally continue to provide pastoral care to his flock while at the same time helping to integrate the other bishop.
Well, I know this is a sensitive issue and a divisive one for Catholics in China, so we'll continue to pray for the church there. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Joining me now is Nina Shea, Director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Nina, first let me get your reaction to the latest news out of China that 2 underground bishops there are stepping aside. In the long run, do you think this will help to actually bring unity to the church?
Well, there isn't unity because the government of China has refused to recognize the 30 underground bishops. So the unity has been on the terms of Beijing. The Pope has recognized their bishops, some of whom, including these 2, have been excommunicated in the past by other popes. But there's been no reciprocity by recognizing 30 Catholic bishops who are thought to be still alive in the underground.
And I know there's a lot of Catholics who still think that the church is giving leniency to China. The Chinese government, though, crackdown isn't just affecting Catholics. It also impacts Protestant churches, really all churches there. We heard about a mass arrest of Christian members of the early Rain Covenant Church last weekend in China. There was also another one that you were following.
Yes, Samuel Lamb's church has been shut down. He's very well known. His church was one of the very first house churches after the Cultural Revolution to establish itself and be tolerated. There's also the Zion Church in Beijing, which I wrote about, which has been shut down after the pastor was asked to put face identifying cameras on the pulpit trained at the congregation. He refused to do that. It was the largest house church, Protestant house church in China, and all 15 members of that congregation have been arrested, detained, harassed. And the Bob Fu of China Aid, which is based in Midland, Texas, but he is someone who has gotten asylum here from China and is one of the world's experts on the Protestant churches, calculates that there are 100,000 Christian arrests this year in China. That is astronomical. There were about 3,000 last year, to give a comparison. So this is now 100,000 detentions of Christians this year alone.
It is incredible to think about those numbers. Why is it that the Chinese government wants to control the churches so much?
Well, I have a bad feeling that they're trying to eradicate Christ, the Bible, and the church teachings from Christianity, to make it an arm of the Communist Party. And it's a very difficult time for the Catholic Church, for the Protestant Church, for Uyghur Muslims in China. President Xi is consolidating his control over the entire country, and this includes Christianity, the Christian churches, and he has even imposed his own photo, his own picture in the churches, in some of the churches, in place of the crucifix.
You mentioned the Uyghur Muslims. I want to ask you just to explain that a little bit more for people who may not be familiar with, because it's not just Christians, as you say. Uyghur Muslims who are in the western part of the country are reportedly being detained, forced to give up their language and their religion. Tell us a little bit about that group.
Yes, I've spoken to some of their leaders. They're having a very, very rough time. About 1 million of them are detained in detention camps in brainwashing centers, indoctrination centers in Western China. So in the desert, there's a network of camps, of detention camps, where they're holding the Uyghurs, trying to really erase their religion. I've heard of imams who have been forced to drink alcohol. It's against their religion to do that by the government. So the government is trying to really change the nature of religion to both Christians and Muslims, take the content out of it and put their own content into it. It's a very frightening time, probably the worst time since the Cultural Revolution in China.
What do you think the U.S. could do about all this, if anything?
Well, during the Cold War, we came up with something called the Helsinki. We in the West proposed the Helsinki Final Accords to the Soviet Union. And these were 3 baskets of defense, trade, and human rights that we negotiated and got an agreement on with the Soviet Union. And that played a very important role in supporting human rights groups behind the Iron Curtain. We need something like that now. We are already deep into trade talks, into security and defense talks with China, but we haven't been speaking about the religious freedom situation, and we need to. This is a priority. Even in our own national security strategy report of this administration, this is considered a priority for the United States. We need to start talking to them about this.
And in the meantime, I know our viewers will continue to pray for all the churches and people of faith.
Yes.
Nina Shea, Nina Shea, Director for the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Up next, a Catholic member of Congress discusses an important tool in maintaining global stability, and the sights and sounds from the Vatican's annual Christmas concert. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. You may be familiar with hard power techniques like the military to protect national security. Well, a Catholic member of Congress says there is another important tool that the U.S. can use. Last week, Lauren Ashburn talked with him about the role of soft power.
Joining me now is Catholic Congressman Francis Rooney of Florida. Representative Rooney is also the Vice Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. Congressman, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thanks for having me back on, Lauren.
As someone with extensive diplomatic experience, define soft power for our audience.
Well, soft power is using the power of influence and persuasion rather than coercion. It's obviously much better than hard power, military power, and the other more abusive and coercive aspects of diplomacy when it can work. And it's an important arrow to have in your quiver when you're trying to make diplomatic solutions.
So you saw this work firsthand in your role as ambassador to the Holy See. How has the Vatican played a unique role in soft power efforts?
Well, the Vatican is a quintessential soft power source of diplomacy. You know, even going back to the way Pius VII outmaneuvered Napoleon, right down to the way Pope John Paul outmaneuvered the government of Jaruzelski in Poland and in Nicaragua. And is most recently seeing how Pope Francis could conduct a 2-year clandestine diplomacy to organize the meetings about Cuba.
We've witnessed in the present day cyber warfare and social media attempts by countries like Russia and China to undermine our democracy. In such an interconnected world, how can we, the U.S., use soft power to combat these attacks on our national security?
Well, one is what we used to call Radio Free Europe and Voice of America. Now it's the Corporation for Public Media. You know, they're broadcasting Farsi into Iran and have almost 20% market share. You know, you saw what happened in Eastern Europe with their broadcast. So when you combine that kind of soft power with the diplomatic soft power of a trusted interlocutor like the Holy See, you've got an opportunity to convince people that your way is right.
This October, Congress passed legislation, the BUILD Act, which created a new U.S. development agency. Why is development such an important weapon in this fight?
Well, remember when the first round of the budget came out for the State Department that was very severe about the foreign aid and Agency for International Development, General Mattis said, if you don't give me Agency for International Development, then you have to give me more weapons. that's another aspect of soft power which has proved to be very important, is democracy building, institution building, and supporting strong institutions that alleviate poverty and distress in many countries.
The Archbishop of Dar es Salaam has asked the government of Tanzania to reject any foreign aid that is conditioned on accepting Western cultural norms regarding homosexuality. Cardinal Polycarp Pengo said, quote, "It is better to die of hunger than to receive aid and be compelled to do things that are contrary to God's desire." And Pope Francis has been a frequent critic of ideological colonization as well, and on the imposition of social and cultural worldviews on developing nations by wealthier countries. How do you guard against that in the use of soft power?
Well, I think if it's like St. Francis's old maxim, keep the main thing the main thing. If you focus on what you're trying to accomplish, you maybe will keep extraneous political agendas out of the way and can do some real good instead of trying to make a political message.
Congressman Francis Rooney, Republican from Florida, thank you so much for joining our broadcast.
Thanks for having me on.
And thanks to Lauren and Representative Rooney for that interview. This past weekend, the Vatican hosted its 25th annual Christmas concert, and a gospel choir from Tennessee was part of the lineup. Other artists included American Anastasia and Jose Feliciano with his hit song, Feliz Navidad. The theme of the concert was refugees, and proceeds went to 2 initiatives to help educate migrants. And finally tonight, we want to wish Pope Francis a very happy birthday. Yesterday, the Holy Father threw a party for sick children treated by a Vatican clinic to celebrate his 82nd birthday. The Holy Father said children teach grown-ups humility, and he joked he hoped the big cake wouldn't give him indigestion. I can understand why he might be hesitant about eating all of that cake. Still, Pope Francis appears to be going strong at the age of 82. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.